This is the sculpture garden of Bruce Beasley, one of the world's most innovative sculptors. Here also is his home and studio. His work is displayed around the world in museums, parks, universities, and airports. Just walking around this beautiful garden, one can get some sense of how his forms have changed over his career. After attending Dartmouth College, he transferred to the University of California at Berkeley and graduated with a BA in sculpture. At age 21, he was the youngest artist to have his work accepted to the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. In 1968, he was the first to cast acrylics on a large scale, something that had been thought to be impossible. His cast acrylic sculpture, Apollyon, on the grounds of the State Capitol building in Sacramento, California, created a sensation, and today remains the largest transparent object in the world. Recently, Mr. Beasley designed a 17 by 17 foot sculpture composed of slicing steel discs for the Beijing Olympics. It's called A Gathering of Moons. What inspires him? He says, "Nature arrives at this perfect point between change and stillness, between form that is evolving and form that is complete. Nature does this most easily and with rare mistakes. Nature remains the ideal guide and the great resource. Without it there is no warmth, no heart, and I insist that my work have both." In this rare interview, Mr. Beasley talks about his ongoing passion navigating what he calls the endlessly fascinating emotional territory of form. Mr. Beasley, why is nature such an inspiration for you?
Well, it's not that I'm trying to make sculptures that mimic nature, but nature is the source of all of the shapes. Every shape, whether it's rigid geometry or very loose shapes, are all basically in nature. So rather than relating to shapes that have come from mankind, it seems to me to make sense to go to the original source. And all of the shapes in nature have a reason. The living shapes come through evolutionary forces that have led to the development of that particular set of arrangements. Geological shapes have their own logic. Even the wind blowing through the grass has its own logic, but it's based on some real force rather than just coming out of someone's imagination. So that's, to me, the real source of all the shapes that are important.
And you've said that nature reaches a point between balance and perfection, something like that. Does it ever amaze you that as an artist you have to refine your skills and put a lot of effort into getting a piece of art to a point where you consider it perfect, whereas nature can do that naturally?
Well, I don't know if I ever get them perfect. I try, but the reference point for me is actually the sense of rightness that all animal shapes have. Whether it's a banana slug or a golden eagle or a giraffe, all the animals are just right in the sense of their shape and composition. There isn't anything you can change that would make them better. So that sense of correctness, that nothing extra, nothing needed, nothing superfluous, is the standard I strive to. It's a very high standard, and I don't think that I achieve it, but that is the goal, to get that sense of absolute rightness, that sense of presence that everything is just the way it should be. I don't achieve it, but I shoot for that.
Right. I think you were the first to cast acrylics on a large scale, and your sculpture, Polymon, I think that became the largest transparent object in the world.
Yes, that's right.
Now you took quite a risk doing this. You went into the unknown. I think you probably had to deal with your own fears. Were there fears involved in it?
Well, very real fears. First of all, not only just the fear of failure in the sense of not achieving a goal, but the state had advanced me a significant amount of money, and it was clear to me that if I couldn't deliver the sculpture, I would have to give that money back, and if I didn't have the money. So I would have lost the studio. It would have been a disaster. So yes, it was a bit scary, and I think that was one of those things you do at a certain time of your life But the risk was very real and would have been a real problem if it hadn't worked.
Right. You put so much effort into pushing yourself into the unknown and striving to get your work just right. What do you do to relax?
Well, first of all, let me point out that pushing oneself like that isn't fatiguing, it's exhilarating. So that's the first point. But to relax, I'm a reader. I read a lot, and I always have books, and so when I'm not actually working on the sculpture, I usually am reading.
And who do you like to read?
Well, a wide range. James Harrison is one of my favorite novelists. He doesn't write as much as I'd like to read of his, but I go through quite a wide range. I also like history, historical fiction, and edgy fiction. Cormac McCarthy is a favorite. A lot of contemporary authors, and a lot of history.
What objects particularly inspire you?
Well, in terms of artwork, the artist that has had the greatest influence on me and who I think is the greatest artist of the 20th century is Eduardo Chillida, the Spanish sculptor. Wonderful sculptor and wonderful man. Other than that, as we've seen upstairs, I have the large skull collection. I'm also very interested in art of other cultures, and so I'm more likely to go to the Asian Art Museum than the contemporary, or if I go to the De Young, I'm more likely to spend time in New Guinea and Africa than the more European things. I'm interested in art that comes from different cultures because it has the opportunity to take me someplace emotionally that I can't go on my own, and that's what I look for in art.
You've said, I want to be able to take someone to a place that he is not able to get to on his own. And that place is not social wisdom, it's emotional territory. What to you is emotional territory?
Well, that's the core issue of the value of art. I mean, art is not factual information. It's not recording facts. It's emotions. And each art form has its own language of those emotions. For sculptors, it's shape. For dancers, it's movement. For writers and poets, it's the language and words. But every art form has that own language, but the purpose of that language is to move us emotionally. If it doesn't do that, there's no reason to have it. So when I speak about taking to some emotional territory, that's what I look for in other people's art, whether it's literature or painting or sculpture, is to have some response from me that I wouldn't be able to generate on my own. And that's exciting, it's moving, and I think that's the inherent value of art.
How do you know when a sculpture is finished? How do you know when it's right?
Well, that's actually one of the hardest things. But the way I do it, my work is additive. And when a piece first starts, nothing's happening, and then some of the relationships start, a little bit of feeling, I call that the heartbeat, and then my job is to kind of follow where the sculpture wants to take me. And at the point where it really finally feels right, then I actually start taking pieces out. And it's often surprising how much I can take out and have it still be alive. But at some point, I take one of the shapes out, and it's like it goes dead. That shape goes back in, and that's when I know it's finished. So the answer is, when I've taken out everything I can and not kill it, then that's when it's finished.
Do you feel anything in particular when this happens? Or do you just know it from experience?
Well, sure. I mean, the sculpture stops talking to me when I kill it. It goes from something alive and vital to just a bunch of shapes.
The emotions go flat.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When the emotions go flat, then the piece before that was necessary, and it's a fascinating experience. And rather exciting, but that's it. When the emotions go flat with the last piece taken out, that piece goes back in, and then it's finished.
You work with the language of forms, and you say that forms have an emotional language. How would you make this point clear to someone who really does not feel much when they look at art?
I would say to that person that if they can go to the sequoias and see those magnificent trees and not be moved, if they can look at Half Dome and not see the majesty there, if they can go to Monument Valley and not see the majesty there, they might just not be able to get art. However, if they see the majesty in those, but not in art, I would say that they have put up some screens and some filters, and they are letting their the verbal brain get in the way as a filter, and to open themselves up to the art and the shapes and that communication the same way that they're responding to in nature. But if they can see those things in nature and not feel anything, then they just might not feel anything in art either. The patina on this sculpture was done by my wife. It's a wonderful patina, and she does all my patinas now, and she brings a sense to it that it's really a bit of a collaboration. It's like doing a painting on the sculpture. And she has a color sense that I think is superior to mine, and she's a great asset, and she does all the patinas. And I'm very grateful for it.
Mr. Beasley, why did you decide not to cut down the vines?
Because they're beautiful.
Earlier in the day, Mr. Beasley told me, I don't long for nature because I keep my relationship with nature going. I have turned my studio and home complex into an urban forest, even though it is in a heavily industrialized part of the city. I keep all these fossils and bones because I am basically interested in the structure of matter and form, and maybe the inner structure of feeling as well. Looking below the surface to see how these parts add up to make up the whole is an area of perpetual fascination for me.
I collect the skulls because they're so beautiful. It's not actually a zoological collection, trying to be scientific. They're things to me, things of great beauty. But they also demonstrate the wonderful aspect of the variation of shape in nature. Every one of these skulls is perfect in its own way. Whether it's a toucan, very light, and this is a capybara, the alligator, rhino, zebra, lion, all of them are different and all of them just perfect in their own way. And that sense of everything working together, the transition of the shapes within themselves, are a great inspiration to me. I don't achieve it, but I look for that sense of correctness that these all have. I don't want my sculptures to look like the skulls. I'm not trying for resemblance. I'm trying for the sense of rightness and presence and that absolute, oh yes, that's right sense. In some cases, with the human skulls, you can know something about the individual. This skull tells me that this individual, when they were alive, was either loved or powerful. So how can I know that? Well, if you look at where the teeth would be, there are not only no teeth, but there are no holes. When a tooth is lost, it leaves a hole in the bone, and it takes a long, long time, decades, for that bone to fill back in. So the fact that there are no teeth and no holes in the jaw where the teeth would have been tells me that this individual had to have special food made for them for many, many decades. Ergo, this person was either loved or powerful. I think it's more likely they were loved than powerful, but that's what this skull tells me about that individual. Some of them are very interesting in the sense of patterns as well. These two jaws are from sharks that eat a certain kind of algae that they scrape off of rocks. And if you look at the pattern of the movement of this shape as it moves around under the jaw, it's just absolutely fascinating, the transitions of those shapes together. And I just find this just truly amazing and fascinating and inspiring. People ask me, do I do drawings? And I don't, and the reason is that I'm really a 3D guy. Whenever I try to do drawings, I end up looking on the other side of the drawing to see what's on the other side. Most of my work now starts off on a computer where I'm working in 3 dimensions all the time, able to constantly move the viewing point so that I'm working on the sculpture from all angles. And this sculpture has come out of a new technology called rapid prototyping. And this is a machine that will build this sculpture directly from the computer. And this is a wonderful new tool. It would be extremely difficult for me to have made this kind of both complicated and simple shape, complicated in the intersections, simple in the original elements. To have made this in some traditional way of modeling or carving, it would have been extremely difficult to do that. So this new technology lets me literally play with these shapes on the computer, make a model, evaluate it, go back and make changes on the computer and make another model, and see it before it's finally made in some larger size.
Before we left for the room where Mr. Beasley works on 3D computer modeling, I looked at a skull collection again and remembered what he said. Nature arrives at this perfect point between change and stillness, between form that is evolving and form that is complete. But how, I asked myself, does a creative artist create when he gets older?
So, Mr. Beasley, in your career, you've had to lift heavy weights, very heavy weights, and I imagine that in the course of time that takes a certain toll on any sculptor, and yet I don't know of any sculptors who retire. So how do you see your relationship with work in the future?
Well, you're alluding to something very important. Sculptors we're very physical, and not just in our lives, but the physical attraction, the physicality of sculpture is one of the things that separates sculptors from painters.
Right.
And so that sense of working with our hands, getting dirty, getting immersed in materials and all that is the thing that probably is the most common element of all sculptors, regardless of country or culture or anything. It's the thing that we really all feel together. So the question of the deteriorating physical body is a painful issue. I had to face that a little earlier than some of my colleagues because I had some serious wrist injuries in my 40s and had to start having help for things before it was a larger deterioration. And what I realized was that I was determined to not have happen to me what I call the dancer's trap. That the dancer, of course, their instrument is their body. And so just by the time a dancer really has the experience of those decades of practice and really knowing what they're doing, their instrument starts decaying, deteriorating. And I've always thought that was a really fundamentally, profoundly painful and really, in a way, unfair thing. So what I decided was that I was not going to define my instrument as my back and my knees and my wrists and my shoulders. In fact, not even the hands. Although I'd like those to last as long as they can, I decided that my instrument was my eyes and my brain. And I still work physically on the sculptures and will as long as I can, but I'm not going to stop making sculpture if I literally can't lift things or stand very long or anything, because the real instrument is the eye and the brain. I've known friends who I think couldn't conceptualize that very well, and when they couldn't be as physically and lift as much and all, felt that they couldn't make sculpture. And I think that's a great mistake. So I'm determined to be a productive older sculptor as long as I can see and think and have ideas about shapes. Some way or another I'll find a way to make them. And much of that will be help. I have help now. I have a wonderful studio assistant named Albert Dicrulo, a wonderful sculptor in his own right. And he does lots of the work that I can't really do all day anymore. And so, but that's been very traditional with sculptures. Michelangelo had help, Rodin had help. In fact, people don't realize that Rodin didn't come into his own as a sculptor until his 40s. He was a technician for other sculptors for the first 20 years of his professional life. So sculptors have always needed help and integrated that into their work, I think, more than some of the other visual arts.
Now, Mr. Beasley, we have a centerpiece here, and when I came into the room to look at this, you said that you spend more time with her than you do with your wife. Would you tell us why this is so important for you?
Well, the reason
What
I said
is
that-
this creature's name?
Well, I just call it her.
Her.
But the reason she's here is this is the room where I do the real creative work, and I want.
I see you. By that you mean the computers.
That's right. This is where the computers are, and where I'm playing with the arrangement of shapes, and that's where the core of the creative work is. Those first generation of the arrangements of the shapes. She's here to keep several reminders. One is a fundamental thing of what we're made up of, which is not just flesh and hair and skin, but the bones that give us our real shape. And for me, there's no death association with this. To me, this is all just about wonderful shapes, but also a constant reminder that the shapes that are the ones that we as humans know the best and are the most sensitive to are the shapes of the human body. I'm not a figurative artist, but that doesn't mean that the shapes of the human body are not deeply important and a deep source of inspiration. So she's here to sort of keep me on track on that, and the reason that I spend more time with her than with my wife is because I spend more time in this room than any place else.
How old were you when it became clear to you that you wanted to be a sculptor?
That happened as actually a sophomore in college. I went off. I was a difficult high school student for the counselors to know what to do with. I went to a big city high school in LA that had trade courses as well as college track, and I think I was the only one they had that took both the trade courses, metal shop, auto shop, wood shop, as well as the advanced courses for college. And I had built pretty serious race cars when I was in high school, and I learned to weld when I was 12 years old. And so I kind of went off to college to be actually a rocket engineer because the feeling was, well, if you got a smart kid who makes race cars, then the professional extrapolation of that would be the rocket program. And I realized very quickly that the guys that were ending up with rocket engineers were going to spend their lives in cubicles with slide rules and just, not making things themselves. And what I found out was that I liked to make things that were my own, that came out of my own imagination. And I took a drawing class. This was at Dartmouth College. I took a drawing class where the final exam, it was an Ivy League school, so it had to be a final exam, was 20 drawings independent of the class. And I don't know what possessed me, but I asked the teacher if I could do 5 models instead. And I made 3 models. I'm not saying that if you looked at them, they'd show that it was a great potential. But for me, it was an epiphany, because I realized that I could make something with my hands that came out only out of my own brain and my imagination that had some little glimmer of human emotion in it. And that was just exhilarating. Nothing else had felt that way. And based on that, I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Nothing else has ever felt like this. And that was it. I never looked back, and I never considered another profession, and would never want to.
But as you look back over all these years, I was in the sculpture garden down below, and you created a world down there, and you created, in a way, a world with your life. All these beautiful objects. As you look back on all this time, what do you feel? What do you think? Are you amazed at what you've been able to do? Are you surprised?
I hardly ever look back, to be honest with you. You're right. I did want to make a world for myself that was about art, and I wanted to live in it. I wanted to work in it. I wanted it to be my whole life. And that's been very rewarding. But the reason of doing it is the joy of it and the joy of being in it. It's not a a retrospective sense of satisfaction. It's a continuing, ongoing engagement. And I just want to keep looking for the future. I want to be making more beautiful things. I want to be, if I can, do more gardens and more impacts on the world, that's what I want to do. Make the world somehow a more beautiful place than it was without me.
Well, I think you've already done that. So, Mr. Beasley, I'd like to thank you so much for showing me your world and for telling me how you came to it.
Well, you're very welcome.
Okay, thank you so much.
I thought the interview was over, but just as I was getting ready to leave, I remembered that Mr. Beasley had an extensive collection of tribal and contemporary art. He invited me in to see part of it, and here I found myself in emotional territory, some of it raw with the spirit of nature. Early in his career, Mr. Beasley traveled to New Guinea and to the Sepik River area, a fairly dangerous expedition at the time, as cannibalism had still not been completely eradicated. And here were some of the artifacts that he brought back. And there was one final question I wanted to ask him.
In the course of pursuing your art, have you changed?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's a little bit hard for an individual to really be aware of that. There was no dramatic change. I hope that I've grown as I've pursued the art, and I hope that maybe I've hopefully gained some depth and some better understanding of things, but it hasn't been anything revelatory in the sense that one thing made a big change. I just find the pursuit of emotion through shapes to be endlessly interesting. And that was it at the beginning, and that's what it really still is. So in that sense, it's been very constant.